when most people think about sales tax compliance, they're really focused on calculating the tax rate specifically. But rates are really just the tip of the iceberg, as anyone who has had to handle anything to do with sales tax, especially in the US, knows. There's a lot of other things that go into it, which is why it can be so challenging for your business. So what I want you to think about, if you could flip to the next slide, the US alone, again, we do have capabilities throughout the world, but the integration with Work 365 is specifically for the US at this point. So I'm really going to focus a little bit on why it's so complex in the US. So the sheer intricacy of the US sales tax phenomenon is that there are over 13,000 tax jurisdictions, and they can all make their own rules. So it really ensures that it can be super challenging for any organization because transactions can cross, and most transactions cross at least some boundary. In fact, if you can flip to the next slide, it's not uncommon for rates to change between neighboring buildings, even on the same street. And while varying metrics like sales tax can really paint a confusing picture from one region to the next, that's honestly just the beginning. Similar complexities exist along countless other dimensions, and details can really be quite comical. So, for example, how a bagel is taxed in New York really depends on whether or not it's sliced, if you can believe that. And candy bars in Indiana are taxed differently depending on the brand or the ingredients that they might have. So sales tax in the US can be super complex. In addition to that, it's always changing, right? So there are, in 2021 alone, 123,000 tax changes each year. And we're about to actually have a webinar on this, kind of what's coming for 2024. But each year there are tens of thousands of changes to the rules and regulations and rates. Next slide. On a positive note, the good thing is that commerce has never been so vibrant. It is growing in a lot of different areas, but it does mean that it's also constantly changing. If COVID was something that changed the world in a number of ways, it definitely changed commerce. Our consumer behavior across all channels has shifted. Less physical stores, more to e-commerce. It's affected both online and offline transactions. Next slide. And with that, governments are reacting with really aggressive policies. So I have a few on here. I know the slides are likely going to be sent out afterwards, but a couple things that I wanted to mention. All 45 sales tax states, so all of the states that charge sales tax, including parts of Alaska, local parts of Alaska, as well as DC and Puerto Rico, have now adopted economic nexus laws, as well as marketplace laws as of just this past year. Nearly every economic region in the world, major economic region in the world, has undergone some level of indirect tax reform and changes to VAT or GST. And over 60 countries have adopted or plan to implement e-invoicing laws. So even states in the US, like Massachusetts, are already piloting having e-invoicing in the US. So what does that mean to you? It means that everything is a lot more digitized. So if you'll flip to the next one, Todd. COVID really accelerated the adoption of virtual audits by states. So less travel time means auditors are able to do more virtual audits, which means businesses can't really rely on paper responses to audits anymore. And they really do have to be prepared to file things electronically. As I mentioned, over 60 countries have announced or are already requiring that e-invoicing legislation. So all of this, the digitization, the changes to the way that we're doing business, the way that consumers are buying, means that it's more of a burden than it ever has been before. And to be quite frank, most businesses really aren't prepared for it. So they're having to react. I'm sure you are having to react with automating, integrating, moving to the cloud, all of those different types of things. Next slide. And in order to do that, it really requires a lot of resources. So you could throw people at it, but no matter how sophisticated a company's in-house compliance team is, they themselves are an expense, and they're really stretched thin because they're having to manage a lot of different business systems. And because this topic is changing all the time and is becoming far more complex, we're finding that even in the best cases, intelligence around sales and use tax has been a bit in short supply, and visibility to the records that you need in order to be compliant is challenging. A lot of businesses are throwing, additional money at investments in, technology upgrades, automation. But the reality is it is an investment. It's not cheap to get compliant and to get these systems in place. Next slide. But the reality of that is that it's far more expensive to not adopt, to kind of bury your head in the sand. 40% of most states' revenue actually comes from sales tax. Just knowing that alone should tell you something. The states are going to be aggressive because a lot of their revenue, especially in any kind of challenging economy, means that they need that revenue. And the average cost of an audit is over $300,000 when it comes to sales tax. Most companies, like I said, they're already putting people in place and resources in place. If they're not automating, they're probably already spending between $11,000 and $17,000 a month, and not always getting it right, still leaving themselves open for risk. So how do we help? Next slide. There are 5 main steps to tackling sales tax compliance: understanding where you need to be registered, and getting registered there, getting that tax collection right, the calculation right, managing your exempt sales, and then getting it back to those government entities. And Avalara has an entire suite of services that can help with all of those different areas. And how do we do that? We do that through our APIs. So with our best-in-class APIs, we've built connections to all of the systems that you might be working with. And Work365 is one of our newest connections. So this really kind of gives you high level the way that the Avalara suite works. We are built in the cloud. Our tax researchers are doing all of the research on all of those policies that I said are changing and complex and all of that. We're maintaining that in the cloud on the back end. We can give you access to those tax researchers and those tax research. But the main thing is, for the automation piece, is we're connecting with your system. So whatever they might be, in this case, Work365, but we also connect with your ERP systems, your other e-commerce sites, POS, whatever it might be, through that API connection. So that you don't have to be the expert on the tax piece. All of that can stay on our side. Once you get it set up, I'd like to say set it and forget it, but mostly all of that information is going to be flowing over to us. We're going to make the tax calculation and we're going to send it back to you. We'll be as out of the way as possible. Again, it's all happening via your systems. We can even pull in those exemption certificates on the exempt sales side and give you tools to manage those exemption certificates. So that's part of the tax calculation. And then all of that information can flow over into the returns section should you decide to turn that on, so that we can take that off your plate as well and handle all of that returns processing for you. So the goal is really to automate as much as possible. But again, any of these pieces are options and can be kind of an a la carte solution for you. So I want to turn it back over to Kayla, because I think, Kayla, if I'm not mistaken, you're going to be jumping in and actually showing how that tax determination works. Again, the key is really that it's quick, it's easy. You don't have to maintain any tax tables. It is live. It is accurate. It happens in under a second.
Right. Yeah. You definitely don't have to be a user of Work365 to appreciate how simple it is to connect the integration. And, as Michelle states, you get access to all of these great tax logic calculations from Avalara's end, and you can manage and file your taxes directly through them, and they're going to keep you up to date. There's no reason to kind of go in here and just manage your tax codes. That's all, again, through the automation managed through the Avalara piece. So